Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and welcome to Omni at the Movies, or rather Omni at the Netflix queue, considering this is a particular film that, in America at least, premiered on Netflix rather than go to theaters. That movie is the second entry in the Godzilla anime experiment, Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle. I have just finished watching it, and I feel bored. Yeah, I gotta be honest, this movie didn't really impress me very much. First and foremost, let me tell you some of the things that did work. The color palette is vastly improved. Compared to Planet of the Monsters and its 50 Shades of Grey color palette, this movie is much more colorful and therefore much more interesting to look at for the most part. The voice acting remains good, even if the material the actors have to work with isn't the most interesting stuff, and well, Godzilla once again proves why he's king of the monsters at the end, which was kind of expected. But beyond that, I can't really say there's much to justify this movie's existence. And you know what? Spoilers lie ahead, because I really can't discuss what works and doesn't work about this movie without spoiling it. First of all, if you were wondering how Mechagodzilla would turn out once he was in motion, well, you're gonna keep wondering, because he's not actually in this movie at all. No, they do not rebuild him. All of this hype surrounding him, and he just wound up being the least important factor in the entire movie. And yet, surprisingly, J.J. Abrams' name is nowhere to be found in the credits. So this horrifying design, which I kept saying I'd reserve judgment on until I actually saw it in motion, can't do that anymore. It's never going to be in motion. I can therefore only judge it on its aesthetics, and I still think this thing is butt ugly. Now, that's not to say Mechagodzilla doesn't have any impact on the film, mind you. The eponymous city on the edge of battle is technically the nanometal from which he was constructed, having grown and formed a city naturally on its own, sort of like a mechanical evolution. While that's certainly an interesting direction to go, I hesitate to say that really counts as being Mechagodzilla. If the city had some sort of artificial intelligence running it that could interact with the characters, then maybe I would say this worked. As it stands though, this isn't really a mechanized city, it's just a city with mechanizations. In order for it to really count as Mechagodzilla City, it would have to have Mechagodzilla's personality, and this Mechagodzilla doesn't have a personality. He didn't even have time to establish a personality because he was destroyed before he could do anything. And as the eponymous city on the edge of battle, he's just an assortment of buildings and weapons at the Bill Saluto's command. Really, it's the Bill Saluto from which all the personality and danger regarding Mechagodzilla City come from, not Mechagodzilla City itself. There are some interesting ideas in there, I admit, as far as the Bill Saluto's outlook that you must become greater than a monster in order to defeat a monster, but the way it presents those themes is very by the numbers. It doesn't feel like we're being presented with anything different or more thought-provoking than stuff we've seen 1,000 times before. Haruo's character continues to be semi-static. He's starting to show some level of uncertainty that's pulling him away from the single-minded, I hate Godzilla and everything about me is hating Godzilla kind of character he was in the first film, but it doesn't feel like it's quite enough just yet for me to really get behind him. Really though, my biggest problem with City on the Edge of Battle is that it doesn't do the one thing a proper sequel ought to do: progress the story. You know those sequels that come along which feel like they're just the first movie with a slightly different coat of paint? That's City on the Edge of Battle. It basically has the exact same plot as Planet of the Monsters. The characters have a plan to defeat Godzilla. They spend the majority of their time setting up that plan to defeat Godzilla. Godzilla arrives, they execute the plan, something goes terribly wrong, the plan backfires, Godzilla's still alive at the end, characters are dead, and nothing really has been gained. Aside from the drama with the Bill Saluto aliens, it's basically the same movie. And the characters are in the exact same place as they were at the start. That's really the biggest sin a sequel can commit. City on the Edge of Battle basically feels like it's just biding its time until Act 3. And bear in mind, there's no reason for it to have done that. Just because Part 3 is the grand climax doesn't mean Part 2 shouldn't do something. Look at The Empire Strikes Back or The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. Neither of those were the end of their respective stories, but they managed to be 1. Different from what preceded them, 2. Have their own climaxes, and 3. Bring the story forward in logical ways. Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle really does none of those things. Now, it's possible we're going to see the consequences of the Bill Saluto's actions in Part 3, but does that really justify a lackluster Part 2? I personally don't think so. And all of this is compounded by the overarching fact that the movie is just kind of dull. It's not because the movie is slowly paced, mind you. In fact, the movie isn't very slowly paced. The dullness simply comes from the fact that, as stated, it's just spinning its wheels. And since the movie is spinning its wheels, and knows it's spinning its wheels because it's saving everything for Act 3, that results in me just not getting attached. Yuko dies in this movie, and I didn't care. No matter how much the movie wanted me to care, I did not. The moment she began to show signs of actual character development, I suspected she was gonna die, and when she kissed Haruo, I knew it was certain. Granted, that's an interesting inversion of the shonen kiss of death, considering that it's usually the guy who dies, but still, saw it coming a mile away. Now, just because I know something is gonna happen doesn't necessarily mean I can't get invested in it, but this movie just didn't pull it off. So, Part 1 is okay, and Part 2 is a giant misstep. It's not a disastrous film, necessarily, but it's definitely not a good one. Part 3 will have to pull out all the stops and be the most amazing thing ever, otherwise the Godzilla anime experiment is not going to be remembered fondly in the future. But even if Part 3 really does pull out all the stops, does that justify a lackluster Parts 1 and 2? As the old saying goes, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And so far, the journey isn't exactly memorable. Basically, the only reason to watch Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle is so you can understand Godzilla Planet Eater, or whatever the official English title winds up being. And who knows, you may not even need to do that. Man, this year is not turning out to be a good year for sequels. But, as always, you're free to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.